Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever time you're watching this. We're currently in the afternoon, so I have a great guest with us today for our next episode in Behind the Briefcase. So if you've listened to previous episodes, you will know we want to do a deep dive and exploration into our guests that have been successful, guests that have worked hard and tirelessly to actually achieve what they've achieved. And we want to know what that recipe is and how we get there. Some of our guests that you have listened to, you will have seen them in day-to-day activities or at big events and shows. So it's good to actually find out a bit about who they are. Now, today's guest is a bit of a marketing genius. I've known this person for some time and I've always been a big admirer of his work. So I was delighted when he said he would come onto the podcast. He is the founder and CEO of Five on a Bike. But it is York Woodford-Smith. So welcome, York, to the podcast Behind the Briefcase.
Thanks for having me on, Paul. As you said, I'm York Woodford-Smith. And what we do is help care organizations or organizations that sell to care to market themselves and, connecting that with the sales process as well. So the part of that really fascinates me is the activity you do, for example, making a podcast, and how that actually relates into a sale you might make at the end of it. And whether you're a care home or a technology company or whatever it is, that process in between there and there is really fascinating to me. So that's what we do as an organization. And our kind of primary skill set is making video content. So we create videos, a lot of videos of care homes and home care companies. But yeah, we also work with suppliers to the care sector. And then pretty broadly, we work across any type of video making. And, video is a really powerful way of getting that trust, building that trust with your customer, boosting your reputation, and ultimately using it as a tool to increase sales, which is the tagline of the company at the moment. So yeah, that's me, and I'm the managing director of the company. I founded it 11 years ago.
11 years ago. Well, doesn't time go fast when you actually look back at when you founded a company? Where one of the companies that I founded is just about to celebrate its 8th birthday, and I cannot believe 8 years ago it was me sat on top of a care home trying to work out a business plan for how this company would work. So yeah, the years just passes by so quick. I'm going to get you to backtrack slightly, York, because I want to find out a bit more about you. You are normally the man, when I see you at care shows, who is interviewing other people for Five on a Bike. So let's actually reverse this on you. So take me right back, because I'd love to know what your journey was to get to where you are today, or certainly to get to that point where you decided you're going to start your own business.
How far back shall I go, Paul?
Take me back to school years.
Yeah,
I want to know what your education was like.
Well, I can start off. So I grew up in a pub. So my parents were publicans, and entrepreneurs, and a lot of my wider family were kind of self-employed entrepreneurs, builders, things like that. So the working for yourself gene, if that's the thing, is kind of in the blood. So I grew up in the pub. I don't have a lot of kind of early memories, but I'm imagining I was surrounded by lots of people all the time. I hear stories. I still live in the same kind of area that I grew up in. And I quite often bump into people that go, I remember you as a baby on the bar, like in between, like my bouncer was in between the bar. So I suppose I was just surrounded by lots and lots of different types of people when I was younger, which I think is probably part of what's bred that fascination for me in people's stories. And through school, I was not naughty kid, but I did mess about a lot. I was always on my report always said, if only he applied himself, if only he applied himself. And I remember, I'd get in trouble for doing silly stuff in school, but I was never a bad kid. I never had knives or drugs or anything like that. It was always, I was naughty and disruptive in the lessons. And, I thought school was okay. School was okay. I definitely didn't fit the mold of kind of how they might like one to behave in school. So was always kind of a bit, in the naughty class or in the bottom set or something like that. And I remember going into year 10, which is back when I was in year 10, that's when you started doing your GCSEs. And for about 4 months, I really bucked my ideas up in going into the GCSE year, and all the teachers were amazed. I won the 3rd place boys merit points that year in my school. Yeah, so to go from kind of the naughty kids to
Yeah.
that was a big change. And then I asked the school, so you do A levels at school, and I was going to stay on at school and do A levels, and the school didn't think I'd get the right marks to do it, and actually I did. I got like significantly better than they thought I would. I always remember my science teacher being very surprised that I got a double C in science, which was interesting. But I think ultimately it's in there when I apply myself. But
Yeah.
the function of doing an exam and doing coursework isn't necessarily how I kind of work the best. And so I said, I'll stay on and do A levels, and they strongly suggested that they'd rather I didn't. So I was cast off into the college system. So I actually went to college. And as I grew up in a pub, I sort of thought, okay, I'll go into catering. And I'd had lots of jobs. I mean, I had the most amount of jobs ever when I was a kid. Right from 10 years old, I used to be sweeping the car park in the pub. I don't think I did it very well. And I think my dad just gave me some money just to get me to go away. But I've always had like 2, 3, 4 jobs on the go. Always been after the money to, whether that's going out with your friends or saving up for something. I was always grafting some other thing. I remember I started a gardening business when I was 13. And I think I had 2 clients. One of them, I spent like 3 weeks weeding their back garden. Yeah, and got 25 quid for it, something ridiculous like that. But as a 13-year-old, I was like, this is amazing. Like, really, I remember putting little adverts up in the local shop window. I had a paper round. So it's all very, like, everything was quite, I always did lots of jobs, always did lots of bits and pieces, always sort of pushing myself, looking for ways to buy and sell things. Did a lot of buying and selling of cars when I was younger, buying cars, fixing them, selling them on, stuff like that. So I've always been quite kind of liked doing that, like sort of taking product, adding value and moving that on. So I went to college, studied catering, had loads and loads of jobs in different kitchens, and I quite quickly decided that kitchens are, it's a very difficult way to earn money. It's antisocial, pretty hardcore environments. Like, it's really, really kind of crazy, and like especially in busy kitchens. So then I finished that course, and my dad said to me, "Oh, well, you've got to get a job or do another course." So I said, "Oh, okay, I'll do a course." Looked around, sort of thought, "Oh, I'll do that one." Media moving image, I did. So I did another set of A levels in that. And then when I got to the end of that, I quite enjoyed it. We made lots of fun little films, made some good friends. There was a TV studio, so we used to make live television programs. And when I finished that, again, the decision sort of came. It's like, either you've got to go to uni or get a job. And I was like, I don't think I really fancy going and getting a full-time job yet. So I went then and studied so it was actually a course that was placed at that college, but it was called live television production. It was a BA in live television production. So I spent three years doing that, which was good. I had the same issue where my teacher, who used to direct EastEnders, sadly he's passed away now. Me and him very much butted heads. I remember a specific situation where I wound him up so much he kicked a chair, and then I complained about him to the dean, and then the dean made me apologize to him for winding him up. So I've never quite been the one that fits in that way that they'd expect you to. But I suppose I've always brought a bit of energy. And again, through college, I had loads of different jobs. I remember one job, I worked in the Chinese restaurant in washing up in the kitchen, and they never let me change the water, but the water was always really, really hot, but it was disgusting, this water. And I was begging them, please let me be a waiter, please let me be a waiter. And they let me have a go once. And my first table I cleared, I spilt the stuff all over the floor. So they were like, we maybe don't think this is the best choice for you. But I've worked in pretty much every pub, restaurant within a 5-mile radius of where I lived. I've worked in most of them at some point, worked behind the bar a lot. And again, I think that kind of all of that stuff, that working in service jobs really sort of opens up that interesting conversation. Always been the type of person that likes to ask people how it's going and ask about them and ask and ask. I'm always been interested in other people. So so I got to the end of the college course. Stop me where you want, Paul.
I'm loving this because actually, what you're doing here is connecting so many dots that I can see where you've got to today. So carry this on.
So while I was at uni, I got my first kind of proper video production job. And this was actually quite a big kind of what happened with that was quite a big turning point for me. It's quite sort of thing that happened. So I worked for this chap, and I remember the first day I worked for him, it was in an annex on his house, and I went to his house and met his wife and his kids, and he gave me a credit card for the company and a key to his house on the first day. And I've always been people trust me.
Yeah.
Quite quickly. Yeah. I don't know whether that's just a kind of maybe people are just generally quite trusting, but people have always given me quite a lot of trust quite quickly. Maybe I sort of just come across as unthreatening, and maybe that's part of what helps people open up when I talk to them, that I can just, I don't approach it that way. So he gave me his, keys and a credit card, and I worked for him, I think, for about a year and a half, and I was doing at uni at the same time, doing lots of jobs, and he was sending me off to London to film with an accountancy firm called Grant Thornton. So it's a big accountancy firm. I'd go there for the day, initially with him, and then after a little while he started sending me on my own. So I was like 22, 23. He was billing me out £1,000 a day and paying me minimum wage at the time. So I think I was getting about 65 quid a day. And as I started to develop on my skills as a camera operator, I got some freelance work with a company called Blade & Moore, which is again, I'll touch on what I did with them in a bit. But they were paying me £325 a day.
Oh wow!
And I was like, wow, this and as a
made it.
I was like, this is mate, £320 a day. Wow. Yeah, I had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and travel into London, or sometimes I went overseas. You got a bit more if you went overseas, but it was hard work, and the work was interesting but quite boring at the same time. And so I went back to this chap and said, could I have some more money? Yeah, so I said, and I've been working on quite a close relationship with him at this point. Could I have £100 a day instead of £65 a day? I emailed this to him, and I got a reply almost immediately with just no. And then he never spoke to me again. Never. Wow. That was it. And that was it. That was the end. Yeah, that was the end of that relationship. And I remember something he always used to say to me, which was, it's really interesting reading I went onto the Behind the Briefcase LinkedIn page.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, it's just business. It's not personal." And that's really always stuck with me as like, no, it isn't. Like they're people. The companies you work with have people in them. All of this stuff is human. So although you're just thinking, well, it's just a business decision, go away, it had a pretty big impact on me at the time. And I was pretty pissed off like when it happened. And actually, I think it was the best thing. I think he did me a real favor, because ultimately it got me out from under his wing. And I just went, well, you know what? If he was doing it, well, why can't I do that? Why? Yeah. And looking back, I appreciate a lot. He taught me a lot about how to edit. He was a BAFTA-winning documentary editor. And when we were working, we used to be editing really kind of like horrible films about kind of starvation and stuff like that. And he worked with this production company. He was the editor for it. So, I took a lot of insight. But then, the way that relationship ended, it's just like that. And that's always sat with me as a thing where, I don't want to treat people like that. I think, using that as an excuse to be inhumane is, I think, wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen you, York, around your team, and you always come across as sort of like that, very friendly, very approachable, very positive, culturalized person. You can see your actual team modeling themselves on you, which is the greatest, in a positive way, the greatest influence that you can have as a leader of a team, because ultimately you're trying to inspire them to give you their most creative and innovative thoughts, or put them certainly down into the job they're doing. So I think that comes through quite a lot. I love the fact in that story leading up to the business creation. I love the fact how everything resonates in the building of the person that you have become. And I kind of, it's a message that I try and instill to people, certainly the younger people that come and work for myself, that I know there's a cliche that every day is a learning day, but it is. And no matter how old you get, there's so many things can occur in a day. And if you actually look at what they're delivering to you, or the message they're giving, or the feedback that you can take from it, later on down the line, they're going to help to mold you into the person that you become. And that, back when you're talking about in the pubs, I mean, that is building complete, that's networking all day long.
Yeah,
You're building
exactly. Yeah.
rapport with people. You're learning how to communicate with people.
Yeah.
You're
I
actually
mean, yeah,
learning different styles of communication because
exactly. Yeah.
you're dealing with all the stories of all these people within in the pub. And then when you talk about the work ethic, it was instilled in you from an early age. If you go right back to your um, parents, and you've been surrounded by people who were self-employed, I can resonate with that because my dad used to always say to me, be your own boss. Don't take orders from someone else. Be your own boss. Make your own decisions in life. And that was instilled in me as a very early age, and very similar to yourself. I was taking on tons of jobs from a young age, jobs that there is no way social services would allow to happen in this day and age.
Yeah, for my coffee
So,
shop, I have to do. You have to do a form if you employ anyone under 16. You have
yeah.
to ask permission from the school and their parents. Yeah, I definitely didn't have any of that
Oh,
when I
I
had a
was getting let
playground.
loose
Yeah,
with so many things that would be so wrong. My parents would
yeah,
have had me, I'd have been taken off them immediately. They were sticking me on a train and sending me to a stranger's house at like the age
mm,
of 8. So it was go live with them for 6 weeks in
yeah,
this racing yard. So you kind of look back in those days, and I don't fault them because actually it developed me as a person, and that ability to be able to communicate with people as well. But even when you look at you putting your own job adverts out, you're advertising yourself at a very young age. That's content that you're putting out
mm,
there, and you're learning what works, what doesn't work, what will get you the success. And your opening line when you discussed who you were and the business, how it was about taking the journey through from the starting process to the achievable process, which is results. That's literally that learning curve. The disruption side within you, I love that because actually, isn't that what you've got to be as a creator? You've got to disrupt the norm. You've got to not just
mm,
do the same as everybody else. You've got to find other gaps. So that naughtiness comes through in your creation. And I think that comes across, and this is how I would describe you. I hope I'm not stepping on toes, but the trust thing for me comes because you are that cheeky chappy, even in your image and everything like that, that actually people warm to you, they want to be around you. So I think just listening to all of that it's very easy to turn around and see the man that I see today, how he was built. And I think we are all built with,
mm,
we can either have that mentality of taking all these life lessons and utilizing them to get us to a point that we can look back on with fondness, or we can take those life lessons and have that almost victim mentality that can sit there to say life has always beaten us up. You could have changed that story and said, I was made to work from this age.
yeah,
I was brought up in a pub. My parents sat me on a bar in a bouncer. Yeah, you could have turned that, but instead you used that as an influence of positivity. I absolutely love it. And then to take the lessons from how your boss treated you in the end. I've said this, I've said it on previous episodes that I had 3 people in my life that I classed as, in working wise, as I classed as major influences, and all of them had a different positive, but all of them had a different negative, and they helped to build me by me taking the positives, but actually promising myself I would never be the negative side. So a typical example of that is I built a business for someone. I know that's an easy thing to say, but I literally did. And I was always promised shares in the business. And when it came to it, they sold the business. I hadn't been given shares. And ultimately, I walked away with absolutely nothing. But they tried to tie me into a contract in the sale. I walked out before that point. I said that I would never do that to members of my team, which is why I gave away shares in my business only
mm,
a year ago to the most loyal members of staff who had put everything they could into the business, because I wouldn't be that person and make that promise to someone and not deliver on it. So it's the same with you and your team. I've talked for far too long there, but I just loved hearing your story there and how it connects up. So let's move it forward then. You've decided to start your own business. You've decided to do it on your own, which is a great thing because it's similar to myself. It was engineered by someone annoying you, really, or someone doing you wrong. And that's the greatest story ever when you can turn around and say, actually, if that person hadn't done that at that moment in time, my life trajectory may have been completely different.
mm.
So I'm interested. So you start your own business.
Yeah. So
How does it go?
I sort of finished uni, sort of thought, okay, well, I looked around for a few jobs, and this whole thing happened right at the end of uni. And I just thought, okay, I'm working with this company. So I worked for this, it was a PR agency in London called Blademore. And my job was, we used to media train people. So we would go to HSBC, Outpro, also like every big company you could imagine. And we'd sit with their senior leaders, and me and a journalist would grill them and record it and play it back. And it's really like, I found the whole thing, like I probably did 600 or 700 of these things, right? Day in, day out. Yeah, used to do 2 or 3 a week. So it was the same thing over and over again ultimately. But I got to see in the boardroom people working, really, really senior people in companies under pressure from an external party, talking openly about issues within the companies. And I got to go, I traveled all over the world. I went to Democratic Republic of Congo.
Wow.
I went to Singapore. I went to America several times, Norway, all over Europe. And a lot of the time I just go to a boardroom like in a business, but in the middle of the financial district, and interview someone who was like, the senior leader in big bank or whatever it was. But I over time, CEOs, I got to sit with like billionaire CEOs and ask them cheeky questions, and get them at their most vulnerable, and play back stuff where they've made mistakes, and be like, okay, well, if you notice it. And part of the reason they brought us in was because we could, as external providers, actually say, look, you've got, spinach in your teeth, or the way you're describing this is going to get the company's stock price into trouble. And then actually seeing those people go on the news and be in the newspaper, and seeing the work that you did influencer. So that was a really big kind of influence. I think, again, that thing where I'm just going into these companies, and my job in that situation isn't I'm the one there to observe and ask questions. I worked in BlackRock and Goldman Sachs, and I went inside these companies and saw, and people would come in, and you could tell what was going on in the company, because they'd be quite open, because they know it's an external training provider. They'd normally be fairly senior. Most of these people are on 6 figures plus. So it's a real kind of insight into that world. And while doing that, I met lots of journalists, and then started doing lots of video production things with different journalists to film all sorts of different things, and stories about stuff. And I worked for Alibaba, like a giant Chinese companies, and all sorts. So I had a really interesting kind of mix of work. And then at some point in there, I said, well, I want to start a company. And that's when I came up with sort of concept of Five on a Bike, and created the limited company. Kind of went, yeah, cool, okay, I've got a company. And then you sort of realize, well, actually just creating a limited company it's like not even barely the first step of what it was. And at that point, working towards, ultimately, I think what I was looking to create was this is the coaching that I've received talking, but a profitable company, a profitable thing that works without you.
Okay, let me just stop you for a second. So first of all, first question, Five on a Bike, where'd that come from?
So I obviously, I've got a bit of a quirky name. And so then when I was coming up with the company name, we wrote out probably 100 different names. And we were looking through, me and my wife were looking through traveling photos for inspiration. So, sunset productions, waterfall productions in there. And there was I took lots of photos of 5 people on a bike in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, because the people just travel as families on bikes over there. So I put that on the list. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, we'll come back to that. And then as we go back through the list and take it off, and that name comes off, that name, but Five on a Bike just stuck. And we're like, well, how does this relate to production? So as you've got 5 aspects of production: producer, director, camera, edit, sound. So you need those 5 skills to make a film. So and that's where it was born out from. So the idea of the 5 characters, and in, like, say, a movie, you'll have those 5 people, but they'll also have 20 people working underneath them. So in each, but one person can have all 5 skills, but in an ideal scenario, you have a separate person that does each one of those roles. So that's where it was born from, inspired by families of 5 people on bikes in Vietnam.
I love it. It's strange how I have a training company, and I called it CBA Training, which stands for Care Business Associate Training. So I just done the CBA-training. And about 3 months in, Gracie, my daughter, who was probably around about 9 at the time actually turned around and said to me, "Why have you called a company Can't Be Arsed Training?" I had not even twigged what I'd done, but I run with it because actually people started to talk about it. Have you heard of this company Can't Be Arsed Training? So in the end, I had to make it very emphasized that it's Care Business Associate Training. But it's weird how these little things work. With 5 on a bike, I love that. Right, the second part to this, and I'm sure people will be very interested in this part, is all that background you just talked about. I've not heard the word care come into it in terms of the industry of social care. Now, I've only known you within social care. So did you find your way into social care, or had it always been your goal to go into social care?
No, I stumbled upon it. So, in the way that, as a video production company, we were trying to generate leads, and we generate leads all through different ways, AdWords and SEO and networking and people we knew. And it happened to be one of the people that was working for me at that point. His girlfriend worked for a company and introduced us into that company. And then the person who was in charge of the marketing of that company left and joined a care company called Sunrise Senior Living.
I remember.
Don't exist in the UK anymore. And then when she joined Sunrise, she called us up and said, "Oh, we'd been talking when I was at this other company. I want to do some videos for this one. Let's do some." And so the first bunch of videos we made were of like interviews with residents. So I remember really distinctly there's a chap called Alan who lived at Virginia Water, Sunrise in Virginia Water. And we just went round, interviewed him, asked him about his life, how he got, where he got there, why he was at the care home, what his journey to go into the care home was, how that had helped him live a better life. And he was knocking around in a 6-bedroom mansion in London on his own, not eating properly, going to the care home where he's like life of the party. His family come and visit him all the time. Like, he's got friends there, he does activities. So it really transformed his existence. So we worked with Sunrise for quite a few, and we still work with the original team from Sunrise. So it's been handed over to various different people, but we still work with them. And that's where we started. And I think what bore out for me was that in a lot of the video work we do, you get like almost no like satisfaction from the work, because so it's especially true in, say, internal communications. We did a lot of work with big companies, and we'd make them video and we'd be like 16 edits in, changes, CEO seen it, he wants this change, changes, and we'd know it was done because they just stopped talking to us. And then you'd never see it. You'd never see the impact that it made. You'd never really get it. So it was really kind of, you do this thing and you send it off and you never really see the impact. Whereas the stuff with care, you see it go on the website and that that's going to have an impact on someone's decision. Even if that's just one person that watches that video and goes, this is a really, like, as we know, like entering care, if you're having to buy care for your family member, it's really, really hard. It's probably the hardest decision you're going to have to make in your life. There's a whole load of drama wrapped up in it. It's probably an emergency. It's probably last minute. So we know when someone watches the videos that we make, it helps them make a better decision. So, and that's ultimately, I think, why we specialized in care, because it just helps you sleep better at night, and you have
you
a
can
better,
see the journey as well.
yeah,
Absolutely.
you have a better sense of purpose. And all the other videos, as much as, and I remember very early on in my career, I did weddings.
Right.
Weddings are really hard, right? Really, and but the satisfying thing with weddings is I used to go around the people's houses and play them the DVD I'd made. Not quite VHS. I was a bit past that, but and I'd watch them watch it, and it was really satisfying to do that, because you see the emotions of it. And actually, it's a similar experience recently. We're working with the company at the moment, and we made a podcast for them, and I took the trailer of the podcast in and I played it to the team, and they all loved it. And it was really like strong for me. I watched them watch it and I was almost like in tears, because I was like, that's our work. And you can see that like joy and excitement it's creating with these people. And it was really nice. So that's ultimately, I think, why we specialized in care. Yeah. And there's a whole story about how we actually ticked over to being specialists in that sector, and what happened, and all through COVID, if we want to go into that.
So how many years ago did you just say it started? Was it six?
So Five and a Bike was started in 2014, and we started
2014.
working in the care sector in 2015. So we
Okay.
sort of throughout. So I've been working in the care sector for a good 10 years now.
So you kind of were nearing the halfway stage, and then COVID
Yeah.
hits.
So we did, we'd really, I went through a whole journey of like coaching. Like I did a lot of coaching. Like I used a company called Action Coach quite a bit, which was
Oh
really
yeah.
good.
Mhm.
Was really good at the time, but then also I think that did create me some problems later. And one of the questions that you in the pre-briefing was bold ideas that flopped, and I can
Mhm.
talk to you about one of those that came from Action Coach if we get around to it. And yeah, so I did a lot of coaching throughout the time, and from sort of 2015 to 2019, we were like a startup, right? Like I was spending every single penny on equipment and team members
Yeah.
and office space and like advertising. Just everything was going back and back and back and back into it. And so 2019, at the beginning of that year, or in like November 19, I invested like 45 grand in new offices, loads of new equipment, 2 new team members. And I think you probably met one of them, Sakara, who actually doesn't work for me anymore. But she joined then, and someone else did as well. So I was really over leveraged going into COVID, like super over leveraged going into COVID. And that was a whole story in itself, which we can get into if you want.
So yeah, because I mean, and COVID's a tricky one for me because obviously there's a lot of people that went through a lot of pain and suffering during COVID, and there was a lot of businesses that did too. I kind of look back on COVID and go, it actually was the making of a business, because it made me focus on something that I had rejected for a number of years. So we had been playing with the virtual classroom education system for maybe a year and a half leading up to it, trying different aspects of it. I wish I'd invested in Zoom at the time, but on the basis of it all, I was like, no, this will never ever work. People want face-to-face classrooms. But when COVID happened, we were one of the first companies, because we had all this set up in the background, to switch everything to virtual classrooms. And then we went international very quickly. So it was like absolute, not a lock. Lock's probably the wrong word because it's not something I stumbled across. But I don't believe, if COVID hadn't happened, I don't believe I'd have ever pushed that button so early on virtual. So interesting to see how different businesses coped. The success story in that is turn around and say, "Oh, I pivoted very quickly," but it was just pure.
Yeah.
I went against my own beliefs,
Well, it was all on
and it
fire,
worked.
wasn't it? Right. So
Yeah,
it wasn't, it feels quick looking back on it. I think the main thing for me out of COVID is that, am I allowed to swear, Paul?
of course you are.
That it made me not believe in my own bullshit anymore.
Yeah,
So I was very, very like confident in my ability to forecast the future. COVID, like, not only took a sort of lighter and petrol to that, it like obliterated it,
yeah,
because you suddenly go like have this thing happen that's just like unreal. Like, and that looking back on it, the whole time it's very surreal. I did lots of like forecast sales plans. Where's the money coming from? How's it going to get in? Who are we working with? Like real like targets for every year. Like really, I was really into all of that stuff, like growth as a company. And COVID came along and just blew it all up, right? And suddenly you go, wow. And we had a sort of a freezed period where we sort of nothing was happening, and then my team came. All sort of like everyone got a bit bored, so we had a couple of months we were furloughed. And I said in May, well, if everyone comes back, so if everyone comes off furlough and comes back to work 3 days a week, so they took a pay cut to come back to work.
yeah,
We'll if we can get to, I think I remember it was 11,460. If we hit 11,460, you can come back for 4 days a week in the next month. And then there was another target for the next month. So I've never worked so hard in my life in that May, but I had such a clear purpose. Like, and we went from selling, videos for 3-4 grand a pop to 200 quid. We did videos for like the local yoga teacher, like all sort of like we did so many, and it was a bit of a nightmare overall. But ultimately, I knew exactly where I needed to get
yeah.
to. So it was a time for me in business where suddenly I was back at the center of it all again, in terms of like, it's my effort and energy that, and it's really clear what I need to do. And then at the end of May, we just about made it. And we got an email from Sunrise at the time, who said, oh, we've actually had quite a lot of success through COVID in terms of protecting our residents.
Yeah.
We're going to spend a load of money on a PR campaign. Can you make a video for each one of the 48 homes that we have over the next 3 months? How much will that be?
Yeah.
So, and knowing the lady, I was like, she doesn't want like a whole proposal document. She doesn't want to do, she just wants the number. So I email her this number, 6-figure number. It's this, and then for 3 weeks I hear nothing, like nothing at all. And I just get an email back saying, yeah, let's go ahead with that then. And that was what kind of changed the perspective for us, that we went, and I think I said when we were talking before we started recording that sometimes you put all this effort into sales and marketing, and then just something random pops up out of nowhere that you had no expectation that was going to happen. And that's happened like probably 4 times this year, where we're like, oh, what are we going to do? Where's the money going to come from? And then just suddenly out of nowhere, you weren't expecting it. Yeah, you've had 15 conversations with other people that's nothing to do with those people, and they just pop up and say, oh, hi, we're ready to buy now. How much for 10? And you go, crikey, right? Okay, great. Like, and and it's, again, it sort of shakes one's well, maybe it's just the idea that it's cyclical, like that people buy when they're ready to buy, and if what you've got is in need. So through COVID, our product went from, have you ever heard of the concept of love, want, need in terms of business? So if people loved video and they wanted it, but they didn't need it. Whereas through COVID, they loved it, they wanted it, and they absolutely bloody needed it because they couldn't show people around the homes. So our business just went gangbusters for like from 2020, 21, 22. Like we were barely keeping up. It's just like bookings, like every mad. Like we were just busy. And then going into 2023, because of the changing in the conditions, that need just slowly trickled away again. And we didn't really, we weren't really ready for that, because we'd been like riding the high of this wave, and then suddenly it's gone away. And then actually, as much as you want to do that, the need is gone. You can't you can create your own need to a certain extent, but that's very, very hard to do. So love, want, need. So through COVID, our product was love, want, need. And the perfect business is a love, want, need business, like a supermarket. People love the supermarket they shop in. They want to go there and get the food, and they need the food, right? So you've got a perfect model.
So what's really interesting there is that I alluded to it also, and that was that during COVID, I had success that came out of that. But what it misses is the bit that you touched upon, because there was points where, as a leader or as the owner of the business, you can't help but think the very worst, and that causes the stress, the anxiety, and sometimes we don't open up. I was terrible at this, of not actually finding someone to go to, and almost pull my hair out. I didn't want to display it to the family. I didn't want to display it to the team members. But ultimately, there was many a night, even during COVID, where I sat on the kitchen floor in tears, wondering how on earth I'm going to lose everything that's been built.
And like you said, it's difficult to actually find people in your world. Like you said, as a business leader in that aspect, a lot of people are invested in your success. So my family are invested in my success. Your friends are looking to you. Your team members, your clients. So it's actually quite difficult to find someone that you can really be honest with and say, God, like I'm really struggling with this stuff, and I've over the past, so I used to do a lot of coaching, which definitely did help, because you just have someone external you could talk to, and you work through the problem and rationalize it. And I've always been quite good at rationalizing it. I think actually what I am good at is swallowing it, which, to a certain point, it does create you a problem. And I've, in the last year or so, I've started doing quite regularly therapy, because it just does help just process it. And the person that I speak to doesn't have all the answers. And actually, I don't want them to. I don't need them to, because the answers normally need to come from me. But the fact that your team, your family, the people around you are normally invested in your success.
Yeah.
And then externally as well, right? Like I always thought that when you market a business, you market positivity, because negativity doesn't sell. People want to be associated with positive businesses. And I found this with the coffee shop that I brought, is that, it's really hard, and it's really, really that, that's been in some really, really dodgy situations in terms of like things that have gone wrong and like money and all that stuff. But actually to go out to the market negatively and say, why is no customers coming in? Oh, you miserable lot, come on, where are you? Doesn't work, I don't think, really. And then, but then when you're feeling negative and you're under pressure negatively, it's even more difficult to go out there and be positive on social media, and because you feel disingenuous about it. So it does, the sort of modern way of marketing does create a bit of a
Yeah,
juxtaposition.
do you know what? I had that as well. I think I've been someone that's gone out and done, if I was looking at what the big areas of my learning in life have been from an educational perspective, I really focused on mental toughness, resilience. A lot of the goals and ambitions I had were pushing me to my absolute limit. So I would preach all day long about growth mentality and positive thinking, as opposed to sort of like the victimization. And then something weird happened to me, York, earlier last year. I just like a switch went off in my head, and for the first time, I would say I fully experienced what mental health burnout is like, and it changed the entire person that I was. And actually, one of the parts that I started to feel really guilty about was because I went to a complete victim mindset. Um, and then I felt fraudulent, because you've been preaching all this stuff for all these years, and now
Yeah.
you're the one that's actually sat on the other side of the fence, turning around and saying, "Just leave me alone. I don't want to speak to anybody." And it caused serious tension in relationships. The business started to slip as a result, because whether I like it or not, I'd be the key motivator in the business. You have to be that person as a leader. In the end, I'm just sort of like turning around saying, "I'm going to sell everything. I've had enough of it all."
Yeah.
And it is hard to actually put that message out when you feel like that. So in a way, you've got to try and find to reset. So when you talk about therapy, in a similar aspect, I had to find people within a network to talk to. And what I actually found was a lot of people that I thought would be the right people were not, because their vested interest was in what they could get from me, not what they could give to me. So my circle of people has actually shrunk, usually over time. And I've kind of sort of like not necessarily pushed them away, but pushed them to some people to the point where you're there for certain aspects, but you'll never be in the inner circle again, because they just couldn't handle that aspect of me when I needed them the most.
I went through a period where I sort of, the best way I could describe it was that I lost my mojo.
Yeah.
And I actually leaned on my team at the time and just said, look, I can't, like, you're looking to me for like solutions and ideas to these problems, but I just don't have them. I do, but I don't believe in myself to a point where I'm like, I don't, like I said, you don't believe your own bullshit. And I'm like, oh, I could, we could try this. And a lot of, solutions in business are not at all short term. So you can try something, but it takes time to really try it. And then you've got the whole wrap up of like, did I do that well enough? Did I try hard enough? This person did it and it looks like they were successful. So I leaned on my team for quite a while to sort of basically say, look, I need space and time, and to come to the office a bit less. I need to do these bits and pieces. But then I created this sort of other pressure where I was like, okay, well, if I do this for 2 months, I'll be back. But actually I'd changed. Like I was a different beast to what I was before. And I had to sort of go through a process of accepting that. And I like I said, I think the growth mentality, I was obsessed with growing the company. And now actually I'm much more concerned. I think this comes with like having a family and like going through that cycle of business and seeing that over and over again over the past 10 years, what can happen. Actually, what's important is stability. And like, ultimately for a company to be successful, you need to make money, because you need to then pay yourself properly, and I don't want to have a fancy lifestyle, but I'd like to be able to afford to go on holiday a few times a year. And get my car fixed when it's broken and things like that. Right. Yeah. And I save up for a pension, like save up properly for a pension, have money when I retire. But ultimately, there's yeah, like I put too much pressure on myself to like fix it, and then actually it was a whole process I went through where I kind of said, okay, and you know, one of my mottos at the moment is, so I'm a very goal orientated person, so probably for the past 10 years, every year I've had like 12 goals for the year, 3 goals a quarter. And if I've got more than one thing going on, I've got 3 personal goals. I've got 3. Da, da, da. So I was really like, and yeah, and I think goal setting is great, because it teaches you to fail. Because most of the time you fail your goals. Yeah. So yeah, and I think, yeah, looking back, I played a lot of sports when I was younger, and I think that teaches you to fail because you can't, you lose the game. You play football and you lose 5-0. You lose 5-0, right? Like you've got something wrong. There's no hiding from that. You've got to. Yeah, and when I do a company report and we've made a 10 grand loss in a quarter, there's nowhere to hide. And that's hard. Not. It's hard to look that in the face. And that's why most business owners don't keep track of their finances properly, because it gets grim.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of the time it's pretty grim. You don't really want to know the answer.
You get to learn how much you spent on Amazon as well.
Exactly, yeah. So one of my sort of, so I wrote out my goals for this year. And then I put a new goal over the top of those goals that just says, enjoy the adventure every day. And that is, you know, and I don't live by that perfectly because I'm still, you know, uptight about some of things and I want to get things done. And, you know, but I'm trying to sort of just breathe the moment. And you know, and like when I spend time with my kids, like be there and enjoy it and just have a, you know, because the only place you can be happy is now. You can't be happy in the past or the future. You can only feel happiness in the moment you're in. And it sounds a bit kind of cheesy, but I think that is important. Yeah. And that's where the sort of, when the growth mindset is all about the future. And so you don't really appreciate, you know, my company turned 10 last year. Like 5% of businesses turn 10, and it's an incredible achievement. I barely even pat myself on the back for it, because I'm like, oh, yeah, there's all sorts of things, right? You know, cash flow's terrible. You know, sales aren't as good as they were last year. Da, da, da. So then, you know, you make an excuse not to celebrate it. But you know, here we are, 10 years on, and you've survived. Exactly. And it's grim, and it wasn't what you expected it to be.
But when you talk about the journey as well, York, it's, you know, and we spoke about this briefly before we started recording, that it is easy to focus on all the good things that have occurred, but actually, some of the things I'm most proud about with myself is getting through some of those tougher times, because a lot of people would have quit. A lot of people would have said, I'm not doing this. A lot of people, when they didn't get to go on holiday that year, would have said, I'm going to go back and work for someone, and I want a regular income and salary. But the idea that
there's a note to that. It's not actually very easy to quit when you own the businesses.
No, it's not.
I looked into this at the beginning of this year, and it's not really easy at all. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that probably answers that question. I can't quit, so you know, I best crack on. I mean, 100%, I would have quit this job probably 6 times over and gone and got another job if I was employed by it, because like my boss is awful. You know, it puts too much pressure on you. You know, I don't get paid enough. You know, and it's, you know, if there's no money, I don't get paid. You know, so you know, and another motto that's come up for me that I thought about was, "Happy is the man who wants what he has." Yeah, I think that's a kind of really nice way of looking at it. Like ultimately, you know, you are where you are, you are who you are. And, you know, there's not to say you shouldn't try to improve or change yourself, but actually being content with who you are as a person, I think, is a skill that lots of people just don't have.
Do you know, though, and this is part of teaching again, that when I went through my period, which, you know, I'm not saying is far from over, I've just learned where the area is to actually try and stay away from. But similar to what you said in terms of when you went for that big growth and you employed more people than you would need and bought new offices, etc. Like that, I did the exact same. You know, I employed people because I predicted the turnover was going to get to this amount, so I'm going to employ another 5 people now to get us there. Created a whole new sales team that we were going to go out and sell the world. Started a tech company and decided that was going to revolutionize the way everything would be. Went and bought myself a Porsche. Went and bought greyhounds. I literally went from someone who was a really I know this is labeling, but very tight or Scottish person, sort of like every penny I spend must have a return on investment
Yeah.
somewhere along the line to sod it. And it was because for the first time probably in my life, I actually had money. And therefore I wanted to go spend it and enjoy it. Um, and then I quite quickly started to realize that that's not who I am. And I was starting to mix in circles of people that I wouldn't normally go to, and I was trying to become them. So I was trying to be something that I wasn't. And coming out of this period, I sold the Porsche. We sold some of the properties that we had because we weren't using them. The Porsche was the most uncomfortable car to drive up and down a motorway in. I had to carry a suitcase. My suitcase when I was doing overnight stays was living on my passenger seat. So you're sort of like doing all this and realizing very quickly, go back to what you love to do. And what I love to do is be at the heart of a business, be around people, and really motivate them with ideas and suggestions and watch people grow internally to be what they are. That's what I love doing. And I kind of stepped out of that and said, no, I'm a CEO now. And everybody else runs the business, and I get to enjoy the luxuries of it. And actually, stupid, because that work ethic that I had as a child, in the same way that you did, that's who we are. And if you take that away from us and try and make us something else, we're not happy. So I know I wouldn't say burnout and things like that are something that you should steer towards, but that work-life balance is part of it, is figuring out what makes you happy in the morning to go to work. And that's what
and there's a whole slice of guilt that comes with it, right? Like of not, if you're not in the office at 7, but you're pounding away, or whatever it is that you're doing, that you're somewhat behind. And I find sort of social media doesn't really help with that from that perspective. And LinkedIn's like a really good tool for me in terms of getting out there and speaking to people and making connections, and using it as a tool for the business. But I also do find it quite hard to look through, and Instagram. And so at the moment I've got Instagram and Facebook in hidden folders on my phone, so I forget about them. It's constantly looking at people being successful, people presenting success is exhausting. From a perspective, and then sometimes just being in the moment, and like I said, being happy with what you have. It doesn't mean you need to stop, but I think that's an important part of it.
I think as well, working with people you like. I probably got to a mentality of I don't have to like them. I don't care what they're like to work with, as long as they're giving results. Actually, no, I want to come to work and feel like I want to be around that person. And then that's the key. So happiness.
We talked about before about the kind of, what happened with my old boss and it not being personal. And I think this is probably like a weakness of mine in business, is that sometimes I can't, because I've got the people and I care about them on some level, that I can't actually sometimes make the hard decision. Like probably at 5 on a Bike, I should have cut the team, properly cut the team like in half, like in the middle of 2023 when we weren't doing that well, but I didn't. And that created me all sorts of problems because I didn't want to let go. I didn't want to do that because I've invested lots of time and energy and effort into getting to know these people, training them up, and it matters to me. And I think a cold, detached business owner would say, well, no, you need to make the team smaller. And sometimes I think, well, it's just not, it's not something I really want to do, and I think it's to a fault. I think that doesn't make me a better business owner in a lot of ways, but then in some other ways it does, and it builds loyalty. And we had some really tough times over the past sort of 12 months with the company, which we're coming through now, and this team is still here with me and they still want to work.
They've been through that battle with you, so they know what it's like. That's going to build the resilience up in them, that when the good times do roll on, it'd be like, make the most of this now. It's almost that saying, I've said it a couple of times, it's something I live by, this too shall pass. And it is quite literally saying there'll be good times, but they'll pass, and there'll be bad times, but they'll pass. You've got to be resilient to both.
And I think the bad times do help, teach you a lesson. Like through COVID, we were doing very well as a business, and I was, taking a good amount of money out of the company. I was able to, like you said, probably not quite at the extreme. I didn't buy a Porsche, but I had money for the first time in my life because I've always just been investing back in new cameras, new people, new offices. So I never really had any excess money. And then actually now going to a position where there is no excess money, it resets that idea that, the £700 a month that you spend on your food bill can quite easily be 500 if it needs to be.
Yeah.
And it validates those things. I mean, you actually, rather than going out for a fancy meal, so it was my wedding anniversary yesterday, and we went out for a meal. 13 years,
13 years.
And we went out for a meal, and then actually, while we were at the meal, we were discussing we spent 80 quid on this meal. Actually, we could have just gone for a walk in the park and got like a bag of fish and chips, and we'd have been just as happy doing that. But I did the meal because it's the sort of thing you're meant to do. But actually, if you think about it, it doesn't necessarily. I did also get to eat all the crackling off my wife's pork dinner, so because she doesn't like that.
Oh, you got enjoy that. But you are right. When I look back at memories, often the memories that I remember the most of fondness didn't involve money. They really didn't. They were a day at the beach, or I look at my best holiday. It wasn't exotic. It wasn't sort of like Barbados or somewhere like that. It was actually a cheap holiday somewhere where we just actually had a laugh with the family and the kids, etc. Like that. One of my favorite holidays was driving to France and staying in an old farm, and literally there was nothing to do other than walk through these fields and countrysides. But we ended up playing hide and seek. We ended up going on little treasure hunts. We ended up walking through rivers, getting stuck in a field full of cows and realizing there was a bull in there and panicking and running. And you look at all that and you go, those are moments where actually you laughed because you wanted to laugh. You had a need to laugh, as opposed to when you take the exotic holiday and you spent 3 months worth of salary to get there. You're kind of forcing yourself to enjoy it because you paid for it. So in that same mentality, going for the meal with your wife, it may have created a memory, but you're right. You don't need the fancy things in life to actually get enjoyment. Right. Okay. We've been gossiping for so long. I've absolutely loved this, York. I really have. Let's look at future. So most exciting things we've got coming on, and things that you could maybe give advice to the social care industry as a whole, if we just look at that, because they're going through a very turbulent time in terms of everything's been raised on them. Money's very short. Occupancy levels are lower than normal in most care facilities, and they've got all the recruitment issues that's about to come because of visas. So from your perspective as a business, what have you got coming up, and what advice would you give to them?
So from 500 Bikes perspective, I have a plan called 500 Bike 2030. Bit of my own bullshit, but there you go. Which basically involves growing through acquisition. So we're in, probably starting from the start of the new year, we're looking to acquire companies that sort of sit strategically well with us. So that's either companies that do similar things. So for example, could be a video production company which operates in a different sector. That has a good pipeline of clients and things like that, or it could be like another specialist care company. So we're looking to kind of grow the company, and ultimately the idea behind it is to kind of build stability into the model. Like my team all like working for the company, and I like working for the company, and I want to protect that and keep it safe. And to do that, I feel like I need to build something a bit bigger than the sum of its parts at the moment, because that helps build stability. It's not about kind of marching towards a multi-million pound thingy, in terms of profit. It's about building stability, and then like being able to, when we are doing well, we've got a bit more room for like being ethical. So I'd love to be like a B Corp, and I do approach things generally pretty ethically, but being able to make ethical decisions because you've got the space to do that, and then be a market leader in that area. So one of my team's on maternity leave at the moment, and I wasn't able to be a market leader in maternity pay because we just don't have the money for it. We weren't, I'd love to have paid her full salary for 9 months. I just literally, I would have bankrupted me, right? I'd love to be able to be in a position where, and I think, for example, with our paternity policy that we have, like we're trying to make that really good, so when the lads that are in the team go off, it's like, yes, you 100% get more than a week and a half off with your kid. Like you get, so in our policy, you got up to 20 days of holiday that you can take paid just whenever you need to throughout the process of the pregnancy, and then 28 days fully paid plus another load of holidays as well on top of that. So like you can actually be there and about, because I think that's really important as part of like sort of helping that. And then we're super flexible from that perspective, with kids and times and things like that. So being able to be a company that's got the infrastructure to be kind of market leading in like how it treats its team and its clients and things like that. And then from the care side's perspective, I think, that we still don't, as a sector, tap ourselves on the back and talk about how much of great work we do all the time. And actually there's this idea about innovation, and they talked about this. I interviewed you at the Care Show, and everyone was talking about the innovation. Actually, innovation is small stuff, and mostly that's the important thing. It's just like, you use this tool because it frees you up 15 minutes, which means you can have a proper conversation with Daisy, who's quite far on a dementia journey. Because if you have a proper conversation with her, it means that she doesn't have to be on the psychometric drugs, because you've understood what her needs are and you can deliver those because you've got the time to do that stuff properly. So I think, from the care sector's perspective, and it's hella complicated in there, right? Funding's complicated, the money's complicated. We work with a real range of care providers, some that are luxury and some that are less luxury. And there's space for all of it. Not everybody can afford $2,500-3,000 a week. But some people can only afford $800 grand a week, right? That's all they can afford. So we need that range of services in there. But ultimately, those small businesses need to just, I think, focus on small innovations, and don't imagine innovation is something you have to spend $100 grand on. It's better and easier to enjoy. So that would be my message to the sector: is concentrate on just making that good stuff you do.
Showcase what you specialize in. And a lot of people make the mistake that, we're a dementia specialist or stroke rehabilitation, but actually there's a specialism in that. If you are a 30-bedded care home, for example, then your speciality is that you're not 120-bedded care home. So you're almost that, in this day and age, that boutique service. Then specialize on that. Specialize on the real person-centered care that you can give, because you have fewer people residing in your property, the community that creates. And I think you're right. I think people are too much like, how can we compete with these big luxury brands? Of course you can compete with them, because otherwise there would only be Hilton hotels everywhere in the world.
And ultimately a lot of the care sector's problems come down to the sort of old school business model. This idea, it comes from health, where it's quite instructive, and it's like, well, you as my employee will do what I tell you to do and do the shifts I tell you to do when I tell you to do them. You as my patient, my resident, will do this, and this and that. But actually the world's changed. And the reason I think a lot of companies find it difficult to recruit is because they're not nice to their team members, right? They don't have the basics in place. They don't have, flexible, easy to understand rotoring systems, or they're not flexible in that way, in any way. And actually, I think if you're more open to kind of helping people live their lives, they will work with you from that perspective. So, and I think you can, and again, so I'm not saying it's easy. It's probably, 20 years ago, you just put the advert out and you got people come in and, and they were happy to have a job. And now it's not like that. People are more.
But it goes back to the most important thing, and you touched upon it quite a lot within your own team. Retention's far more important than recruitment. So ultimately, if your retention rates are very low, work on that, because that's going to mean that you're having to do less recruitment. And I think from the perspective, if your retention rates are really low, actually be open and have honest conversations with yourself. Why are they really low? And stop blaming the fact that we're interviewing the wrong people, or we've
Because
You
actually, the
just don't
answer
want
to
to
the
work the
question is
hours.
that, the answer to the question probably is that someone in the company is not very nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all worked for those people,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
we
Yeah.
know. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, if you could leave one piece of advice, lesson, or reminder for anyone listening, whether they're building a business, leading a team, or just figuring life out, what would it be?
Don't assume because you've told someone something that they've received the message.
Yeah, absolutely. Learn how to really actively listen as well to the feedback. I love that.
Really interesting one with my son. So my two boys, and we'd had a day inside, and my wife had said, "Oh, we should go out for a walk this evening." So I was like, "Okay, cool." So I went and told the boys, and I said, "Oh, boys, we're going out for a walk. Boys, we're going out for a walk." But boys, just let you know, we're going out for a walk, right? And they're sort of, yeah. And then one of them sort of looks at me and acknowledges, and then the other one, I said to him, "Oh, did you hear what I said?" And he went, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And I said, "Did you hear that we were going out for a walk?" And he went, "Oh." And he didn't, even though I'd said it. And this happens so often across every aspect of my personal life and my business, is that someone says something to somebody and they've assumed that they've taken it in,
Yeah.
and they haven't. And that isn't because they're being purposefully annoying. They're just, you've not communicated. And I think as the communicator, just take on a bit of that burden and make sure, because the way you've done it, they just might not have heard you in the right way.
Yeah, and
And
I've done
resolve a lot of
I've done a
problems.
lot of work, York, this year and part of last year on internal representational systems. So how we communicate. And it actually led me to become a qualified hypnotist, believe it or not. But ultimately, with your internal representational system, your son who went, may actually be someone who's has a visionary aspect. So the communication he needed to hear was, come on, it's really warm here. We've been stuck indoors all day. Let's go and get some fresh air. Let's enjoy the sunshine. Let's walk as a family. And ultimately, what you do is you're setting the scene in his head. Whereas if you just give him the instruction and he can't see the picture, he just wants to reject the picture. So it's just weird. When I'd done a lot of work around that communication, I started to speak to different people differently once I worked out what their internal representational system was. And even in writing emails, it was amazing how much quicker a response I got if I wrote it in their language or what they needed to see. So I'd recommend anybody to actually start looking at that. And particularly parents, because we've all been in those moments, tidy your room for the 1,000th time, and yet nothing's happening.
Brush your teeth. Yeah.
I love that. It's a great piece of advice. Okay, we've got a section called The Last Word, the lunch list. So 3 people that if you could have lunch with, past, present, influencers, family members, who would it be? Actually, I'll take family members out of it. Otherwise, if they don't get cold, you may get a little bit of kickback. But so I'll save you that one.
I
So
found
who's
this
it gonna
quite.
be?
I found this quite hard. I was just thinking about this today, and I found this quite hard. I did come up with some names. So first one, Alex Ferguson.
Okay.
I've read a lot of his books, and fascinating character. I just get pissed with Alex Ferguson
Yeah,
and have
I'm
a
with
chat
you.
about the football. I think would be brilliant. The other one would be a bloke called Michael Blaslander, who wrote a book which had a big influence on me called The Hidden Half. And the book is all about kind of the idea that we think we know what's going on with most stuff, but actually there's a whole load of bits we don't understand. So for example, when you come to say child development, we have this idea that it's sort of 50% genetics, 50% environment. He proposes that it's sort of 25% genetics, 25% environment, 50% who knows, that we don't really understand.
Right.
Economics is the same, sales, marketing, you can apply it to basically everything. That we have this big massive section of stuff we don't understand, but we don't acknowledge that. We just pretend that we know. Like for example, the economic figures that the sort of media and the government seem to base base everything on. These are quite often pretty severely incorrect and are corrected like 4 years later because new information comes in. And we're basing like a lot of decisions, short-term decisions on this. So I just really like that book, and I thought it was really interesting. And then the other one, I was sort of stuck between, and I wrote down Buddhist monk, and I'm not sure that's because I'm not religious, but I think what I would love to do is, what you naturally with this, you go to like people who are kind of famous that you want to spend time with. Actually, I want to spend some time with someone who is happy. So that's why I guess I go to this sort of idea of Buddhist monk, or like someone who wants what they have, like that person. And they might be, it could be anything, right? They could be, they could be a bum that lives on a beach and just, does casual work. But I'd want to spend some time with someone who just has a completely different thought process from how I'm thinking that, because actually, meeting people that are successful, I think often can be hard, right? Because they're successful, and then it makes you sort of think about your own success, and or failing that, Joe Root or Ben Stokes, England cricketers, I think would be quite cool. Have a few drinks with them and talk to them about cricket. I play cricket, I like cricket. So. But I think
the monk one I love, because one of my, it probably is my favorite book ever, is a book called Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty. And it is just, I remember reading it and wanting to become a monk overnight. It because you had found someone who had found complete contentness with their life. And I think that's what we're all trying to search for in this. Even with the growth mindset, you're trying to chase something that you think will give you happiness, when actually growth mindset isn't just about going after coinage. Growth mindset is about you improving yourself as a person every day, and that can be in every sphere of your life. And I think what Jay Shetty, when he decided to go and spend a considerable amount of time as a monk, found that actually his inner peace was the most sacred thing too. And if you get a chance to read that book, it's fantastic.
Because I think that's the thing. My coffee shop, for example, if it was successful in the financial aspect and it allowed me to buy a fancy car, actually the thing that I probably could get pleasure out of that's there now in front of me is that sweet old couple that come in every week and sit and have a little chat and get a bit of gossip about the local, about what's going on in the neighborhood. And you talk to them about the development plans of the 3 houses they're building down the road, and they just have a moment to like connect with the community and connect with somebody. Like, actually, that's the bit that's valuable and like that's important and meaningful, not like the car or the holiday you buy off the back of the profit. So I think it's finding that someone who's connected with happiness in a different way is someone I'd want to spend time with. But I don't know, because that person's probably not got a social media account.
Absolutely. Okay, lovely. York, I've absolutely loved this. We've been going on for some considerable time. I knew this would happen. I hope you've all stayed to the end of this, because there's been some pieces of dynamite in there, whether it be from your marketing perspective or building businesses, or that resilience that you've got to build throughout it. So thank you very much, York, for giving me so much time this afternoon. People can reach out to you. You're on LinkedIn, and Five and a Bike is also, but we'll put in the threads all the links to York. And he is a very friendly, trustworthy and approachable person, so make sure you do connect with him. You've been listening to Behind the Briefcase with myself, Paul Blaine, and until next time, have a great week, month, wherever it may be. See you soon.